Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Arbitrary 20. In this video we're going to be going over the changes to the fighter in the 2024 revision of D&D. We'll be talking about the impact these changes might have on current fighter builds and some potential new builds as well. So we'll go ahead and get right into it. We'll just kind of go down the list here of changes and talk about them as they go. So first off, fighting style. They're now feats. I don't think that really matters a whole lot and that really won't change any builds. If they're all mostly the same, archery is still probably going to be the best, but none of them are really bad. It would be nice if great weapon fighting got a little bit of a boost, but I doubt that happened. I did hear that the protection fighting style, I believe, got a pretty big change, so maybe that'll open up some new opportunities for tank builds. And then second wind, we get more uses, which is nice, which doesn't directly open up any build opportunities, but it will make any build we make a little bit more durable. And then onto weapon mastery, which is definitely the biggest change to the martial classes. Looks like the fighter gets 3. You can change them on a long rest, and you get more of them as you level up. Even though you get 3, I imagine most builds will pick one and try to focus on it and build around it. And then we'll go over the weapon masteries here as well and which ones I think are going to be best for the fighter. Cleave does seem really good since an additional attack, but it is spreading out the damage to a second target, and that second target has to be within 5 feet of the creature. I'm honestly not a huge fan of this one. In my personal experience, even in fights with 10 plus enemies, it's actually not that common for them to end up right next to each other. This only really happens a lot if you're fighting in tight corridors, but if most of your encounters have a pretty big wide open map, this probably isn't going to come up very often. And then we have Graze, which I think is actually one of the best weapon masteries. If you miss, it lets you still deal damage equal to your ability modifier. This is going to be really strong on builds that are able to get a lot of attacks but aren't necessarily able to get advantage consistently on those attacks, since if your chance to miss is higher, the more damage Graze does. And then onto the Nick property, which interacts with 2-weapon fighting. If you're dual wielding light weapons and you have the Nick property, you can make the attack that you normally would be able to make as a bonus action just as part of that attack action instead, and you get to save your bonus action. I think this mastery is only really going to be good if you can find something else that's powerful to do with your bonus action in combat. I think just using Nick to save your bonus action for utility isn't really going to be strong enough, but I could be undervaluing that. It does seem like there's going to be more things you can do with your bonus action. They have changed taking a potion to be a bonus action, even though most people were playing like that anyway. Divine Smite, if you took some levels in Paladin, is also now a bonus action as well, so freeing up your bonus action could be a little bit better than I'm initially thinking. And then we have Push. I think this is going to have one of the highest combo potentials. I've made a whole series of different forced movement builds and combos. I think this is going to combo really well with the Psy Warrior and the Battle Master, since they already have abilities that can push enemies away, and this can stack on top of that to get 20 or even 25 feet of forced movement on a single hit. This is going to combo really well with spellcasters' area of effect spells, especially the ones that stay on the battlefield like Spike Growth or Web. And I believe you're able to use this with ranged weapons, which is really cool as well. I think before, as far as martials go, it was mainly melee that could do a lot of forced movement, so it's cool that ranged characters are now able to do it as well. And then onto Sap, which I think is one of the weaker weapon masteries. It just gives the creature you hit disadvantage on their next attack roll, which for levels 1 through 4 is pretty decent, but once enemies start having multi-attack, if an enemy's coming up to you and doing 4 attacks and they have disadvantage on the first one, that's not really going to make a huge difference. So if you like this one, I would use it early game, but by the time you're past level 5, I would probably swap it out for something else. And then we have Slow. I think this one has a ton of combo potential as well. This makes the speed of the enemy you hit reduced by 10. Now you can't stack multiple instances of Slow, but you could combine this with like an ally's Ray of Frost and an ally's spell that causes difficult terrain, and then that enemy has 5 feet of movement left if they have the normal 30 feet. Even if they dash, that's 10 feet, and they're probably not going to be able to do anything at that point. And then we have Topple, which I think is one of the stronger weapon masteries. It's a little tough that it requires a Constitution saving throw. Many monsters are very good at those, but since you can make them do it on every attack, you'll probably succeed at some point. This will be really strong if you have a few melee allies, since they'll get advantage as well. And inversely, this isn't going to be something you want to use if you have ranged allies, since you'll topple the enemy and get advantage on your next attacks, but your ranged allies will have disadvantage on all of their attacks. And then lastly, we have Vex. If you hit an enemy, you have advantage on your next attack against them before the end of your next turn. I think this is going to be the strongest on rogues, but it's still great on fighter as well. And it combos really well with the feature we get at, I think, 13th level. Yes, studied attacks. So Vex will give you advantage if you hit the enemy, and studied attacks will give you advantage if you miss the enemy, so you'll pretty much always have advantage after your first attack. And that's all the weapon masteries, so we'll go on to tactical Tactical Mind. You can expend a use of your Second Wind to add a D10 to a failed ability check, and if you still fail, the use of Second Wind isn't expended. Obviously, this is nice for a straight class fighter to give them something to do out of combat. The sessions where it's just something like exploration or roleplay have always been a bit more difficult for the marshals since they don't really have any features to use, versus the spellcasters who can just prepare different spells for those days. But this is a good step towards fixing that, giving fighters an alternate use for their Second Wind when they don't need the healing. I think this is also a cool option for some skill monkey builds. Since this isn't proficiency or expertise, it's just a die roll that you add. A 2-level fighter dip might actually be something to consider if you're making a build focused on skills. And then one thing that's not on here that I do want to talk about is Action Surge. They don't mention it here, but in the playtest, and I'm assuming it went through, they made Action Surge restricted to a certain set of actions. So builds that took 2 levels of fighter to get Action Surge so they could cast 2 spells in a turn are probably not going to work anymore, which is probably a good thing. It was probably a bit too strong and made Spellcaster Nova builds fairly boring since they all pretty much had to take that. And now we'll go on to the fighter subclasses. First up, Battlemaster. Seems like the superiority dice are pretty similar. Some of the maneuvers have been tweaked slightly, and we got the ones from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. The biggest change was to know your enemy. It now just reveals immunities, resistances, and vulnerabilities, but I think you can do it faster as well. The immunities, resistances, and vulnerabilities are all you really needed to know anyway. This could combo really well with a character that can change their damage types. There's a lot of subclasses that can do that, and sorcerers have transmute spell. The more damage types your party has access to, the better use you'll be able to make of this feature. And also the 15th level feature now gives you a free D8 once per turn, so you don't have to use your superiority dice. And then there's some buffs to the champion as well. Remarkable Athlete you get sooner and now gives you advantage on initiative rolls and athletics checks. You also get a new feature at level 10 called Heroic Warrior, which gives you heroic inspiration when you start your turn without it. And they've changed inspiration, so it's no longer advantage, it's just a reroll. So I believe you can still use it even if you have advantage or disadvantage. So if you like to do crit fishing builds with champion, it looks like you can still do that. I was never really a huge fan of them. They can be fun to play, but I just don't think the damage is consistent enough. And then to Eldritch Knight, which the changes were mostly to War Magic and improved War Magic. I think this is honestly one of the coolest changes in the whole fighter. They pretty much get the Blade Singer extra attack, so they can make it attack and cast a cantrip, which assuming backwards compatibility, we're still able to use the Blade cantrips, and there's the new True Strike cantrip as well, so you could even potentially make a ranged Eldritch Knight. And I think Weapon Mastery could combo really well with the Blade cantrips as well. The main one I'm thinking of is the Push Mastery comboing with Booming Blade. If you're fighting a melee enemy and you hit them with a booming blade and push them 10 feet back, they're pretty much just going to have to take that extra damage to get back to you or any of your allies. And then the Psy Warrior is pretty much the same as it was in Tasha's. And then at level 5 we have Tactical Shift, which is a pretty cool feature. When you use Second Wind, it lets you move half your speed without taking opportunity attacks. I think this is going to be a bit stronger on ranged fighters who are trying to get away and kite enemies, but it'll still be good on melee fighters as well, since it's an extra bit of movement you can use to get into melee. And then we have Indomitable, which got a really nice buff. It now adds your level when you reroll a saving throw as well. So if you have proficiency in the saving throw and you use this, you're probably almost guaranteed to save. And if you do it on a save you don't have proficiency with, even potentially a negative modifier, you now have a good chance of succeeding. And then at level 9 we get Tactical Master, which is one of the most interesting features I think. It lets you always have access to the push, sap, and slow masteries. So if you have a weapon with a different mastery than those, then you'll always have access to 4 different masteries. You can still only use 1 per hit, but combining these is potentially really strong. If you slow and push an enemy, you're effectively getting them 20 feet away from you or one of your party members. I actually do like that they included sap here as well, since it's a little bit better when it's one of 4 options you have, when if it was the only option you had at this high of a level, I don't think it would be very useful. But yeah, I think this feature has a lot of potential for builds, and even if you're not trying to build around it, it'll give you a lot of versatility. And then we have Studied Attacks, which we talked about earlier with the Vex Mastery. I think that's the coolest interaction it has to guarantee you have advantage on every attack, but regardless of what mastery you're using, this will be a decent increase to your damage. And then lastly, at level 19, every class now gets an epic boon, and the one they show here actually looks really strong. The boon of Combat Prowess. It increases one of your ability scores by 1, now to a maximum of 30 rather than 20, but you'll have to get a second epic boon playing past level 20 for that to really matter and get to the 22 for the modifier. But it lets you, whenever you miss it with an attack roll, you can just choose to hit instead, and that's once per turn as well, so you're just guaranteed to hit at least once per turn. turn. And if you combine that with the Graze Mastery, even if you somehow roll 4 natural ones, you're guaranteed to do a decent amount of damage. But looks like that's all the changes for the fighter. I think it's in a much better place overall than it was in 2014. I know I'm a little late in getting these out, but we're just going to be going in the same order they posted them in on YouTube. So in the next video, we'll be doing the same kind of thing, but instead for the Paladin. So hopefully I'll see you guys there. Let me know what you think of the fighter in the comments down below, and I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next one.